Watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of the hour. Thailand says 4 soldiers are killed in renewed border clashes with Cambodia as its leader vows to keep fighting despite a US claim of a ceasefire. Cambodia shuts all border crossings with Thailand as the death toll since Monday rises to 14, according to Thai officials. Belarus frees 123 prisoners after talks with a US envoy. The move follows Washington's decision to lift sanctions on Belarusian potash as both sides signal steps towards normalizing relations. Israeli media reports the military kills senior Hamas commander Raed Saed in an airstrike on a vehicle in Gaza City. Gaza health authorities say 4 people are killed and at least 25 are wounded, with no immediate confirmation from Hamas. A storm sweeps across the Gaza Strip, killing at least 14 people and injuring others, according to Gaza's Interior Ministry. Officials say strong winds, heavy rain and collapsing structures hit families already displaced by Israel's assault. 2 people are killed after a Ukrainian drone hits a residential building in Russia's Saratov, regional officials say. Meanwhile, Ukraine says Russia's strikes kill on 2 of its ports, with drones and missiles damaging 3 Turkish-owned vessels, including a food ship. One million Ukrainian households are left without electricity after overnight Russian strikes hit energy and industrial infrastructure across 5 regions. The attack comes as Russia intensifies winter strikes and a US envoy prepares to hold fresh talks in Europe on ending the war. At least 3 people are killed and 9 others wounded after the paramilitary RSF launches a drone strike on the city of El Obeid, sources have said. The attack comes as fighting intensifies across Sudan's strategic Kordofan region, a key front in the war. At least 3 people are killed and 9 others are wounded after the paramilitary RSF launches a drone strike on the city of El Obeid, sources say. The attack comes as fighting intensifies across Sudan's strategic Kordofan region. Those are the headlines, and we start with our top story this hour. American and Syrian military personnel have been injured in the central Syrian town of Palmyra when an unidentified attacker opened fire on their patrol. According to sources, US helicopters evacuated the injured to a US base in Syria's Al-Tamf region near the Iraqi border. The US troops stationed in northeastern Syria as part of a decade-long effort to help a Kurdish-led force there combat Islamic State. 2 local Syrian officials confirmed that casualties occurred during the attack on the convoy, although there was no immediate official comment from the Pentagon regarding the incident. Some local sources claimed the attack was carried out by members of the Islamic State terrorist organization. Joining us. Okay, this situation is, of course, after renewed ties between the United States and Syria after 1 year marking the overthrow of Bashar al-Assad, who ruled a brutal regime over the country for decades. And now the US has and Syrian soldiers have been shot inside Syria. Details are rather unknown. However, we do know that some soldiers were injured. Of course, this is an unprecedented situation coming out of the newly democratic Syria, where American and Syrian personnel have been injured after an unidentified attacker opened fire on their patrol. Okay, Now joining us is Yossi Kapawasa, an Israeli intelligence and security expert, joining us live from Tel Aviv. Yossi, thank you very much for joining us here on the program. Of course, Syria has made a diplomatic comeback since the fall of Bashar al-Assad, who marked his year out of power just a couple of days ago. However, given Syria's re-emergence back on the international stage, instability still seems rife within the country. Now, we don't know who attacked these US and Syrian officials, but if you could give us a snapshot of the threats still inside Syria, and tell us what difficulties that the country still faces today.
Well, first of all, the situation in Syria is very unstable, and the central government controls mainly Damascus and some of the major cities, but most of the areas outside of those cities are anybody's land. It's or no man's land, if you like. And the situation is such that such events happen from time to time, and we see massacres carried out here and there, and it's an unstable situation. Now, one of the powers that still operates in Syria is the ISIS and Al-Qaeda organizations that are still present in some areas in the east of Syria and are trying to have some impact beyond that area of operation. And it might be that they were behind this event that you mentioned before.
Yes, and does this incident suggest a resurgence of ISIS-linked activity in areas that are thought to, in fact, be stabilized?
It's hard to say. We don't know yet. If it was ISIS, definitely it indicates that they are re-emerging, but we have to wait and see the details before we make a judgment here. Of course, there can be also something done by forces that are aligned with Iran. There are still some forces like that, and we have to just wait and see who was responsible for what happened.
Yossi, we know that the United States and Syrian forces were working together when this attack happened. How closely now are the two combat forces working together?
Well, they are coordinated and work together, and we know that the Americans are very much interested in strengthening the Syrian regime. They expect us, Israelis, to help and limit our interventions in Syria so that the Syrians will be in a better position to solidify their control of the state. And they are coordinated, as I said, with the Syrian forces in order to make sure that Shara has control of the situation.
Yes, and the United States has troops stationed in this northeastern part of Syria as part of a decade-long effort to help a Kurdish-led force there to combat the Islamic State. What more can you tell us about the support that the United States has for Kurdish-led forces inside the country?
Well, the Americans were coordinated with the Syrian defense forces for a long while when they fought against ISIS in Syria. But recently the relationships were a little bit strained because the Americans expected the Kurds to cooperate with the central regime of Shara, which the Kurds didn't like very much, and they had all kinds of conditions for doing that. So the cooperation is a little bit more tensed as of last year.
Yossi Kapawasa, thank you very much, as always, for joining us here on NewsX World. It's a pleasure to have you here on the programme. We now move on and over to Europe, and Ukrainian forces have deployed US-made M270 multiple launch rocket systems against Russian targets in the Donetsk region, showing the continued role of Western-supplied weapons in Kiev's defence strategy. The tracked armoured M270 system, first delivered to Ukraine in mid-2022, fires GPS-guided GMLRS rockets capable of striking targets with high precision deep behind enemy lines. Ukrainian units used the system to hit Russian ammunition depots, command posts, communication hubs and troop concentrations. The continued use of these systems, of course, highlights Ukraine's focus on disrupting Russian logistics and command networks as fighting intensifies across the eastern Donbass. Mark Sutherland joins us now. He is a geopolitical commentator and he joins us live from London. Of course, Mark, constantly in the headlines are Russia's advances on the eastern front in Ukraine. However, we do know that Ukraine is still inflicting damage, of course, on Russian infrastructure throughout the country. What more can you tell us about Ukraine's current military capabilities, even as the Russian advancement does slowly continue?
Thomas, good to be with you. Well, in many ways, all I can tell you is what is reported, but but the armaments that they have used, in my own understanding, if you look at it technically, these rocket launchers can fire 12 rockets off very, very quickly, and then that particular unit on wheels can then move fast out of the area. So it's rapid in its delivery, it's rapid in its response, and it's rapid in regard to its exit. So as you pointed out, with what the Russians continuing to then move forward is then the disruption that these particular armaments that are supplied, that are American made, but they're also within the field of the NATO remit as well. NATO has those at their disposal as well. So that is what that's what we're seeing, Thomas. And as you have reported, these armaments that are then continuing to be supplied by the Americans, then paid for by European countries that bought off them, which is at the present time, which is what President Trump has then been pushing. That's the situation that we are in, and as you and I have discussed, where we want to see peace, we want this to come to an end, and of course we've then seen the conversation has come from President Trump, and then Zelensky, Prime Minister Zelensky of Ukraine, then going off to his European buddies to then get support and saying, I need more money. How do we continue this? I need defense of my country. I'll just cynically say that because we all want this to end, and then I sometimes wonder if various forces do they actually want it to end, or do they want to escalate this? Thomas.
Yes, Mark, how have you analysed, of course, Donald Trump's scepticism of Volodymyr Zelensky, and of course this proposed peace plan, which was seen pretty vastly in favour of Moscow? But of course this does come along with the continued deployment of these US made systems supplied by Europe, paid for by Europe, of course. How do you think Moscow views these balanced actions?
Well, I think you go back to when you were first sort of putting the question to me. The present American administration was deeply frustrated. What was done under the Biden administration, which I'll then call it deliberately, in my own opinion, where was any negotiation? And as I have said before, there seemed to be a peace agreement potentially on the table after the first 3 weeks, and then the European leaders are going, no, we don't want this. That is what has also frustrated the President Trump's administration, because of the amount of billions and billions of dollars that have been poured into the Ukraine, instead of everyone then sitting down and trying to understand the situation. You and I have discussed this when we go back to Minsk agreements. Before that, we go back to 1994 and asking Ukraine to get rid of their nuclear weapons, and we will then defend you, says America, then says NATO. We then go back to the situation in 2014 and Newland's infamous phone call soon after that. The amount of interference and what is going on is historic. The number one thing is we want to see this to end. But when we have the leader of NATO going, you're going to have to prepare for war just like your grandparents did, then we have an interesting situation. And the bottom line is, and this is the challenge, Thomas, in my humble opinion, is what do we know? And what are the real facts on the ground when people are not trying to solve this? And also when we go back in regard to the regions that the Russians are in, where people that they speak Russia, they're turning around and saying, well, we'd like to be linked more with Russia. There are so many factors that come in. But there has been huge loss of life on both sides and the destruction of the Ukraine. And just quickly, we cannot deny that Russia then invaded a sovereign state. Us going through the history of the Soviet Union and that being a satellite is another very, very important subject. But the last thing we want to do is see this continue. If I'm a voice on my own saying that, then I don't apologize for that. Thomas.
Yes, Mark, do stay with us as we have further updates, this time coming out of West Asia. Iraqi Prime Minister Shia al-Sudani has met with UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres in the capital city of Baghdad earlier today, in a ceremony that marked the end of UN assistance mission for Iraq. The UNAMI mission was established by a UN Security Council resolution shortly after the US-led invasion in 2003, and it focused on helping Iraq rebuild its democratic institutions. Now, the UNAMI mandate is expected to conclude by the end of this month on the request of the Iraqi government. Let's listen in to what the Iraqi Prime Minister said during a joint conference with the UN chief.
مهمة بعثة اليونامي لا تعني نهاية الشراكة بين العراق والأمم المتحدة، وإنما تمثل بداية فصل جديد من التعاون، وخصوصا في مجالات التنمية والنمو الاقتصادي الشامل وتقديم المشورة. علاقتنا مع الأمم المتحدة من خلال بعثة يونامي كانت محورية وفعالة لتلبية احتياجات العراق ومساعدته حتى بلغ مرحلة الاعتماد على نفسه بشكل كامل.
Mark Sutherland joins us once again. Mark, over 20 years since the US-led invasion of Iraq in 2003 and over 2 decades of UNAMI. What does this say about Iraq's current political maturity and sovereignty, and why have they chosen now to end it?
A very good question, Thomas, and we also remember the Iran-Iraq war soon after the regime change in 1979 under the Ayatollah. So let's just bear those in mind as well as other things that we've touched on earlier. It's very interesting, isn't it? 22 years. Where were the weapons of mass destruction? We look at all the destruction that happened, including civilian lives, the lives of British servicemen, American servicemen. We look back at this, all the oil fields burning, etc. There is a lot of history to then go over. If it's going to be stable, that's not necessary. Of course, that is a good thing, and I'm sure that your dear guest Yossi can then give another input on that, even more greater than I can. But the key, and an understanding of that. But the key is look at it. Suddenly they're turning around and saying, right, we don't want the UN in here. We don't need the UN in here. Many countries don't need the UN, frankly, within their borders. But that's another subject for another day. And if they are then standing on their own 2 feet, with then wanting to have a democratic governance, which frankly is something that the West doesn't understand within that part of the world, that you cannot impose democracy at all. If you then understand the clans, the tribal background to these areas, and also we have to understand when Iraq as a country was then created once the Ottoman Empire has then fallen. People may think, Mark, why is this all relevant? It is all relevant. But the number one thing is, Thomas, some of us remember this history as if it was yesterday. But it's, yes, of course, we want peace in that region, and with all that's gone on since the 7th of October attack by Hamas on Israel, that's another factor that has to be borne in mind in their own stability and their own concerns and understanding of what has happened in Iraq. I think that region, with all the changes that have gone on, is deeply, deeply complex. But we're going to have to see how this then rolls out. Thomas, thank you.
Mark Sutherland, thank you for joining us on NewsX World. It's always a pleasure to talk to you here.
And you, sir. Thank you.
We now move on and to another story from West Asia, and the Israeli military has reportedly killed senior Hamas commander Raed Saed, one of the architects of October the 7th, 2023 attacks on Israel in a strike on a car in western Gaza City. The attack has killed 4 people and wounded at least 25 others, according to Gaza health authorities. However, there is no immediate confirmation from Hamas or medics that Saed was among the dead. The Israeli military said it had targeted a senior Hamas commander in Gaza City without giving a name or any details. If Saed was killed, it would be the highest profile assassination of a senior Hamas figure since the ceasefire deal came into effect on October the 4th. An Israeli defense official said Saed had been targeted in the attack, describing him as the head of Hamas's weapons manufacturing force. Joining us once again is Yossi Kopawasa, an Israeli intelligence and security expert, joining us live from Tel Aviv. Yossi, big news today if this turns out to be the individual that Israel has targeted. However, what does come to mind instantly is this strike, of course, happened during a ceasefire when the first phase has not yet finished. With the second ceasefire being on the table, open for the discussion. How does Israel justify this strike without collapsing this truce altogether?
Well, first of all, the ceasefire is extremely fragile, and there are terror attempts by Hamas all the time, day in, day out. So it's they cannot complain about the ceasefire being breached, because they do that every day. And we respond by carrying out attacks against their key figures, and this has been the case for the last almost 2.5 months. And that's what we see today as well. And Saed himself, if this was really the target, is a special case, because he's the planner of the 7th of October massacre 2 years ago, and Israel has already said that those who were directly involved will not be immune. And that's, if this is the case, if he was really the target, that can be explained by this context.
And of course, we don't know yet. Neither Israel or Hamas has confirmed the death of Saed. However, how many of these targeted killings, of course, 400 people have been killed in the Gaza Strip since the ceasefire began on October the 10th. Apologies, I'll correct myself from earlier. Before this ceasefire becomes meaningless, bottom line, is Israel prioritizing justice for October the 7th or managing a ceasefire that truly prevents another complete outbreak of conflict?
Well, as I said, first of all, the ceasefire is so fragile that it's difficult to refer to it as a ceasefire. Secondly, we are still waiting for the first phase of the ceasefire to be implemented, and we are waiting for the last body of the deceased hostage Rangvili. And this has to be done sooner, as fast as the Hamas can perform that. And third, I think still the interest of everybody is to have a ceasefire. Nobody wants to see the fire resumed. We want to move to the second phase of the plan. So does Hamas. The only difference is that they have their own interpretation of what this second phase means. And we have our own interpretation, or not interpretation. We stick to the language of the plan that says that in the second phase, Hamas should be disarmed. And they say it says that we should be disarmed, but we don't mean to disarm. So we'll see what happens once we reach the second stage. Prime Minister Netanyahu is about to leave for Washington in 2 weeks, and then the fate of this ceasefire and the future of the Trump plan is going to be decided.
Of course, that we know that Hamas has not been destroyed in Gaza. However, from a strategic point of view, has assassinating Hamas leaders really reduced Hamas's capacity or simply reshuffled it?
No, it definitely reduced Hamas capacity. They don't have the capacity they used to have during the first year of the war. They suffered a lot of casualties, including most of their leaders, and they are not the same threat that they used to be in the past. That said, it doesn't mean that they are not constituting a threat. They do. And they carry out attacks, and they still have arms, and they still produce arms, and they are still committed to destroying the state of Israel. And we have to bear that in mind and keep doing what needs to be done, especially as they don't respect the ceasefire and keep carrying out attacks during the ceasefire.
Yossi Kopawasa, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's a pleasure to have you on the programme as always. We now move over to the United States for our final story, and the US Department of Veterans Affairs planned to eliminate as many as 35,000 healthcare positions this month. The cuts involve mostly unfilled jobs, including doctors, nurses and support staff. According to a report which cited a memo shared with regional leaders last month, the agency hopes that the cuts will reduce the healthcare workforce to as few as 372,000 employees, a 10% reduction from last year. Veterans Affairs Department spokesman Pete Kasparovich says that this move will have no effect on VA operations or the way the department delivers care to veterans, as they are simply eliminating open and unfilled positions that are no longer needed. Okay, that's all that we have time for this hour. Keep